Alright, well, we've made it to the third unit now, and that would be we're going to, for the 7th graders, in this 7th grade painting unit now, we're going to spend our time painting in the project that we spent so many days working on here in 7th grade art class. And I've got a system that we use for painting this in, and we're going to use a watercolor kit, of course, and your watercolor kit is laid out, and you'll have to acquire a watercolor kit for this, but we have our letters on here. This is red, and this is orange, just like a rainbow, and this is yellow, and this is green, just like the color wheel also. This would be blue, which will indicate with a BL. Okay, this is violet right next to it. It's very dark colored and is many times mistaken for black. The next one would be brown, which will indicate by BN. And lastly is the black, which will indicate with a BK. Okay, so when we are doing our switching colors, you will know exactly what color we're looking at in here. Now these are very shiny and don't show well, you know, they're clear colors right now on the projection screen, but once we start painting they will look fantastic. You're furthermore going to need a piece of paper towel that you can have available to you on the sidelines. I guess I should have indicated that you'll need a paintbrush. I'm using just a simple 6th grade round paintbrush with a plastic handle myself, and you'll need a small cup of water. I am using a fruit cup, but just the remaining portion of the cup, no fruit, right? And I'll be using that water. I rarely change it. In the physical classroom, I would resist having you change it. However, in your own home or your own classroom there, I guess you can change the colors as frequently as you like. You need to arrange your paint kit on one side. Normally in the physical classroom it would be at the top, and that would be a good place to put it so that you don't dribble back and forth with your artwork all over the place. Okay, so we're going to get started here. I want you to fill this in according to the system that I show you here today, and there is a reason for that, and it's got a lot to do with what we call color theory. My first thing I'd have you do is probably rinse that paintbrush out completely. We have, if you're in the physical classroom, these paintbrushes are used by several individuals. If you're in your own classroom, of course, well then that's a different story. You may be able to find a paintbrush that you prefer to use that is not all filthy. I am going to try to find a slightly better paintbrush if I can, and it doesn't matter to me which paintbrushes that you use, only that you clean them out when you're done with them. And we have numerous of them in our classroom. You see what I've got here in my painting studio. Well, I may be doomed to have to use just the paintbrush I've got there, and maybe a couple little detail brushes here that I've got available to me. Okay, so here's how we're going to start this. Make sure your brush is already clean and dry. That's the best way to get this whole mess going. And then we're going to start with some green. So if you look at your paint kit, the green of course is right there. I've got a fresh paint kit, although if people keep their paint kits clean, they will not, in group lessons in the regular classroom, the physical classroom, it's important that you keep that paint kit clean because it will have a number on it, a seat number. And that seat number is somebody else that sits in your seat during another class and uses that paint kit too. So get it, keep it clean. So we want to put just a drop of water, just a drop of water, not a puddle, and it starts to melt. The more we stir the paint, the denser the color becomes. The less we stir the paint, the more transparent it is. Now I'm going to set this off camera, and I only put it on there for demonstration purposes. I will also be using a slip sheet on my painting as well to avoid smearing my artwork. Okay, so we're just simply going to start with the, in my town here, that's about all of the jobs I've had, or a lot of them in my life. I'm going to start on the left side with the Park Row, where I was a busboy for many years. And so you really only need to use the very, very pointiest end of the brush. If you find yourself mashing down on the brush firmly, you are pushing too hard on the brush, and it damages the brush, but worse, it gives you terrible control with the paint. And so a fully accurately loaded up brush should be able to give you quite a bit of distance out of the charge of paint that you put into it. But once you start noticing that it's getting really thin, or you're having to really push down on the paintbrush in order to get good color, then you need to reload the brush. And that's something you need to do frequently, in fact. You just can't really paint with a dry brush. Okay, now I'm going to go back, and my paint still looks pretty good there on the paint kit, so I'm just going to continue to apply it, but I can tell it's a little bit gummy. So when that happens, you simply need to just put just another tiny drop of water onto the paint compartment in your kit, but not so much that it gets all soggy. But that the water is what makes the casein, which is a milk protein that's in the watercolor, is what makes it work. Now you can also just barely touch the tip of the paintbrush as well into the rinse water, and that will dilute any heavy paint that might be trapped in your brush. I'm going to do that right now and show you what kind of results we get. Alright, so, and watercolor has got advantages and drawbacks, and the reason we use watercolor in 7th grade, 6th grade you're pretty much just learning about painting. 7th grade I'm more interested in developing control skills with my students. And so these control skills mean, can you paint accurately inside of the areas of the part of the artwork you drew already. Now see, we can melt that little bit of watercolor there and smooth it in. Now, so one of the advantages of watercolors is that if you are really don't necessarily like the finish that you've got, the next day you can take some clean water and you can melt the watercolor a little bit actually on the paper, and it will smooth it all out. Now on the other hand, one of the problems with watercolors is that they if somebody, or you yourself, that's usually how it happens, should for some reason or another dump water out on your, or knock out your rinse water on top of your painting, it can really be destructive to the whole painting itself. So you know, it causes you to have to really be careful, and that's one of the objectives here is, you know, learning good brush skill, being able to constantly see the very pointy end of that brush is very important. That visual feedback, as we call it, is critical to your ability to put down paint accurately. So as you can see on the projection screen here, my paintbrush, the end of it is always visible to me so that I can see immediately. You should know immediately if you make a mistake, not like when you lift your hand up and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't see anything. I never noticed that happen. So we're really going to spend our time skipping around in our painting in order to make sure that we put wet paint next to already existing dry paint, because if we're going to fully paint it in, we're going to need, that's going to have to happen at some point in time. And so if you put wet paint next to existing wet paint, especially with watercolor, because of something that you might have heard about in science called surface tension, they will pull themselves together like two beads of water, two drops of water that are on a freshly waxed car. And that, the wet paint next to an already existing wet paint then will infuse together and make some strange effects that are useful if you know how to, if you know what you're doing with them. If you're an amateur painter or a novice, you will probably not be satisfied with the results. However, if you were painting, for instance, flowers, and flowers have this phenomenon called variegation. Variegation is where one color just, you know, blends into the next color with kind of a soft edge. That is very useful in watercolor, and so people who are landscape artists who paint pictures of the great outdoors many times use watercolors strictly for that purpose. Watercolors are also very motive. Now we're using a much more controlled technique right now. But if you were to be on your own and painting, for instance, a landscape or a seascape, you know, a picture of the ocean, watercolors are really good for that as well, simply because that fact that they do kind of melt together and variegate is very pleasing in some cases as well. But right now, in the 7th grade, in this project, we're working on brush control techniques, opacity, something called viscosity. Viscosity is simply the idea of how syrupy or runny a fluid is. So, for instance, honey has a very high viscosity. It's very syrupy, whereas water has a low viscosity. It's very runny. And so when you have viscosity is how also controls in watercolors particularly how smooth the paint, how runny the paint is, how pasty the paint is. So if you mix the paint up too aggressively, like you're, you know, kind of whipping eggs for an omelet, well, then you're going to end up with paint that is very sticky and gluey. And it's opaque for sure, but it just won't come off the brush. And on the other hand, if you use too much water, you'll get very, very transparent effects, and then that's not so good either, at least in the project we're doing right now. So the issue here, now I'm going to have to use the back of the brush. It's risky. Alright. The point of the 7th grade painting project is to learn brush skill. Sometimes when you're painting, especially if you're in very tight areas that are difficult to control around, you simply need to just hold your breath briefly while you are painting. So you'll see me doing a number of things throughout this painting, and one of the best ways to learn how to do something that you don't know how to do is to watch somebody else do it. And in this case, that would be me, I suppose. So I've been painting for some time, and I've made a few good paintings, and I think you can learn a lot by simply watching what we call a mediated learning experience. That would be where somebody is actually showing you how to do something, such as weaving a basket, for instance, or how to disassemble some piece of mechanical equipment and then reassemble it again. These are all best learned not by somebody explaining it to you and giving you a worksheet. These things are best learned by watching an expert do it. When I was in the military, watching an expert break down one of our weapon systems and explain how it all worked and then putting it back together rapidly and accurately, that was fascinating to almost all of us. And we, for the while, wondered why it would be important that you have to break it down and be able to clean it and put it all back together very quickly. And it was explained pretty clearly to us that that is, you know, if you were in battle and for some reason you had a malfunction, you have to be able to disassemble that equipment very quickly, repair it, or reduce whatever it is that's happening to it, the malfunction, and then reassemble it and put it back together so it's usable again in a very short period of time, because that piece of equipment is critical to the mission. And it doesn't matter whether it's just a, you know, a weapon system, or whether it's a bulldozer or a Jeep, or, you know, the mail delivery truck. All those things are critical to the mission. And likewise, they're taught by experts in the field when you have to break these things down, and they show you right there in front of you. And then you practice and practice and practice, and pretty soon you can take it apart, put it back together almost blindfolded. So these types of skills, painting, repairing things, mechanical equipment, these are all best learned through this mediated learning experience, we call it. Now, I don't know how fast you're painting, and I'm more interested that you paint good than fast. However, if you're keeping up with the instruction like I'm doing, then you're probably doing pretty good, and you're probably getting fair results as well. Okay, so we're trying to just blend all this together so it's all one uniform color instead of like areas of super dark green and other areas of really bright green or real transparent green. So the key to doing watercolor is to be able to accurately put the color on the pigments, that's the colored portion of this, and not have to really fight with it. And you want it to look one smooth color. Now if you can do that, that's a huge achievement. It's not that easy to do because the paint is simply drying as we're applying it, and it takes a few minutes to just do even one building. So we're just trying to break down the darker areas with a little bit of wet paint. We're trying to darken in the lighter areas by using a little bit of darker paint. Now I want to paint right over my numbers. This paint is transparent enough that it can be seen through in most cases. Excuse me. The dark blue and the black and the violet, of course, are a little bit more difficult to see through. We will be using all of the colors in a specified order here before too long. So the first day we usually do a building, and then after that we go to something else. Now we probably could have started with the sky and the sun as well, and that usually keeps everybody very busy for some time. I've tried to make the stripes in my sun at the top of the painting there all about the same width and rather wide, you might notice, simply because that helps get the painting done faster. Some of you may have 100 little thin stripes and that will really slow down your ability to paint it. So while you've got the chance to do it, you might want to edit your drawing and just erase every other stripe so you end up with a series of broad stripes, not a multitude of thin stripes, which can be really a pain in the neck to work with. Okay, I'm making good progress here. And for our E lesson, excuse me. Now, if we were in the physical classroom, we would still be doing this almost exactly the same way. I would have drawn the entire drawing with you, just like I did here in the E lesson. And I would have also painted it in during our painting unit, which is what we're doing right now. So I'm hoping you're able to participate in this if you're not too far behind. Alright. That's looking pretty good. So the key is just to try to use just a dot of water, just the right amount of water, so that we don't get real sticky, gluey paint, and also so that we don't get paint that's so runny that we can't control it. So that viscosity is critical to your ability to control the paint. So viscosity is simply just a word from science about how syrupy or runny a liquid is. We talk about it a lot in oil, viscosity breakdown. It loses its ability to keep the engine lubricated because it will no longer have a film like honey or like syrup. It breaks down, it's just like water then. So you need viscosity. You'll hear that word all the time now. Okay, I'm almost done with my first green building. Didn't take too long. Now we've got to, like I said earlier, we've got to skip around on our work here. We don't want to put wet paint right next to an additional or another area that's already got wet paint in it to keep it from infusing together, okay? So watercolor is tricky that way, but boy does it test your ability to control the materials. My voice is worn out, ladies and gentlemen. I've been doing so many of these lessons, talking constantly all day when I do these lessons. It's really wearing out my voice. Okay, and sometimes too, here on the drawing table I have a multitude of lights set up. Sometimes it's a little difficult to see. precisely what I'm painting, and you wouldn't think that, but there's so much light being cast onto this surface that it's sometimes it messes with your vision and reflections and stuff too on it. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's get this last little scrap down there, and then we'll just rinse out the brush and we'll move on to something else as we march our way down this street. Alright, not bad at all. Alright, so I'm going to leave that to dry now, and I'm going to move on to something else. I'm going to rinse out my brush. I'm going to find my paper towel over here and clean it out thoroughly. Alright, now we kind of try to have to work our way around these paintings a great deal so that parts of it can dry while other parts of it are still undeveloped, and so we can't really go right next to this and paint this alleyway or any of the windows or doors. We'll have to come back to those things. Traditionally, we've always started with the sun, so I think what I'll do right now is I'll just go back to how we traditionally have done this, and I have to, you know, keep a surface down so that I don't mess up my painting here. Now that I spent all this time doing it. Alright, so in this case we're going to go to the orange right now, which of course is the second one in from the left side of your painting kit. And we're going to melt a little bit of that orange, and we're going to paint only the sun and the sunbeams in this time on this early morning. So let's melt some of that. Make sure your brush is clean, or you'll see the green residue kind of polluting your orange there. And then once we get it cleaned up, we're going to start painting it. Now you can turn your painting upside down if you'd like to. However, my painting is taped down in front of the projector, and I'm not going to turn it upside down. So I'm able to actually, I have a chair that's got wheels on it here and a concrete floor. So I can wheel around all of this and change my angle of attack on the painting here. In your case, I'd just say turn the painting upside down. It's much easier that way. One of the things that I covered in our lecture was clean working habits, which is the idea of keeping your painting from getting messed up simply through sloppy work. Now we're going to get this very first beam that sticks out the very top of the sun, just like this, and try to blend them in there so that they are the same color, and work right up next to the line. Hold your breath if you have to, and you should be able to see the moment you make that mark with that paintbrush. You should be able to see it. Now back here, there's still some of this denser orange paint. I can pick that up and transfer it, see. So this, we're painting right on top of our, normally in the physical classroom we would probably use some poster board for this project, but we are not in the actual physical classroom right now, so we're using paper in this case. If you do have poster board, that's fantastic. You should use the side that's not shiny. If it has a shiny side, don't use that side when you're making a painting with it. The paint really struggles to stick to that kind of a surface, and watercolor doesn't have any adhesive in it anyway, and so as a result of that, it will just not really stick to the surface of the paper. Not only will it not stick to the surface, but it won't sink into the paper. So part of the beauty of drawing paper and watercolor paper, which is a specialty kind of a product, is that it absorbs the colors, the pigments, and the paint. And when you use it for drawing, you stain it with the colored pencils and the actual drawing pencils. So that's why it's so hard to erase them sometimes, because you would have to erase the actual, scrub the paper off of the surface in order to get it to work, to erase. Alright, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go back for another dot of water and melt some more orange there. Try to keep it the same viscosity if at all possible. and I'm going to go, look, beam, skip, to another beam. So if you just always are alternating here, you'll get good control, and you'll also get they will dry, the paint will dry better this way because it's not up against other wet paint, and you'll get a better finish to it as well, since it will be not polluted and it won't be running into other colors right next to it that may be wet still. So we've got to really do, watercolor is more about control than it is about anything else. And some people have got it, and you know it when you see it. And some people struggle, not just with watercolor. If you struggle with watercolor, you probably struggle with other types of paints too. So it's all about how to handle the brush, really. There's a tiny little bead of paint, a little ball of paint on the very tip of the brush called the bead. And being able to accurately move that bead of paint around is pretty much all there is to knowing about painting. Some people just never really understand that. They never get that manual skill. They think of it as more like a marker, and they keep mashing down on the end of the brush so hard that they cannot acquire any level of precise skill with it. Okay, I'm going to move on here. Now in this case, look, I've gone beam, sky. I'm going to have to paint in all this little complicated stuff there that I maybe set myself up for without thinking about it. So planning a piece of artwork out keeps a lot of these kinds of things from happening, okay? And that's why I'm big on planning. In my mind, I like to have a good idea of what that artwork is going to look like before I ever even start making it. So I do sketches and I plan things constantly. If you are in a high school or a college level class in art, you will be forced to keep a sketchbook, and that sketchbook has all of your ideas and shows your thinking and problem solving planning process that your instructors will require you to show them. They really resist and do not reward people just making artwork without planning. It stops being a kind of a job then. Now let's test this. If you take your pinky, which the back of your pinky is the most sensitive portion of your hand, if you take the back of your pinky and you touch it against the watercolor, and if it feels dry or warm, then it's dry. If it feels, of course, wet or cool, it's not dry yet. You can't work next to it. So you have to be very careful about that. So we test the water, we test our finished paint or our dried paint pretty frequently just to make sure that we can operate next to it and not get that infusion where the colors touch each other, wet colors touch each other, and then they will just make a mess. They run together because of surface tension. Alright, it took a lot less time to paint in the sun than it did that big green Park Row building. Alright, so now, and I can paint pretty fast. I'm familiar with the materials. You may not be able to paint this fast. You may have to pause the or slow down the video so that you can keep up with the level of instruction that we got going on here. Okay, so see, it's once you know how it works, it goes pretty fast, doesn't it? So the orange sunbeams are in. Now we're going to leave those alone, and we'll come back to those at a later time and put the sky in there as well. So I'm going to rinse out my brush completely, and in the next case I think I'm going to go to this next building. I'm going to paint it in, I'm going to say, let's go with, it'll look really opposites, kind of. I use that idea a lot. Now the opposite up here of orange would be blue, which is going to go in the spaces in between, so that'll be the opposite. Here we've got green, and next to it, its opposite color would actually be red. So we're going to find the red on our color kit, and we're going to get your paintbrush cleaned thoroughly. Just get a tiny drop of water and put it on there. You can always get more water and put more water into the colored cell or the pigments or the paint cell, but it's really kind of difficult to take it out. So my advice is just use one drop of water at a time. You can always add more drops of water to it. Now I've already went ahead and melted that. I've got to kind of dry off my paintbrush a bit. It's a little bit getting a little runny there. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I will not be painting this triangular shape. We're going to come back to that later. Just the front of the building, the facade, very much like the building we painted previously, right next to it. Now, in the I paint pretty quick, as you may be noticing. However, in the physical classroom, these paintings can take up to 2 weeks to do. So simply don't be discouraged if you are not keeping up precisely with me. You know, every time I put the paintbrush to the painting, you may not be precisely right where I'm at. And a lot of people will, in the classroom, the physical classroom, will say that I'm going too fast, but I'm really simply just trying to stay one step ahead of everybody. Some students can paint pretty quickly and with good results. It's one thing to be able to paint quickly with terrible results. It's another thing to be pretty good at this. And some people paint on their own, you know, and so once they get into a class project, it's something they already know how to do. Hold that breath. Alright, now I'm going to transition here and start going in the other direction. Oh, I'm almost snagged some of that orange there with my slip sheet, my index card, so you just gotta be careful. The clean working habits are vital to making a good painting. Looking on the back of the brush here, that's very risky. You can't, the brush blocks your view of where the paint is actually going on. So that visual feedback, like I was telling you earlier, is really, really important to your ability to get accurate results, okay? So I'm going to have to get a little more water, some more red, and keep on working. So there is kind of a ideal viscosity for these colors, and it's different for everybody, but it's you know, a color that's opaque enough to look good, fluid enough to move around on the paper easily, and thick enough, viscous enough to not run into areas that you're trying to control. So all of these things are what we'd call, you know, the ideal consistency or viscosity, if you can get that to happen. Now, after experience, you start figuring out how much water to put into the watercolor kit. And our watercolor kits here are what we call in cake, meaning we melt them and they are in a little cake almost. However, watercolor also comes in tubes, and then you have a little special mixing bowl for those watercolors. Looks like it's it looks like it's got little dimples in it, like an egg container. And you can take your watercolors and put them into each one of those little dimples and mix them together to get the colors you desire, or leave them in a pure state as well. But we use our watercolors in cake. So they're a little bit easier to work with for large classes, and the kits are all uniform and the same. Although, you know, fine artists will use watercolors that are in tubes. Okay, just like oil paint. If you've ever seen oil paint before, it comes in tubes, like toothpaste tubes almost. And that is, you just take a little bit of it out, just like toothpaste, and you melt it with enough water to make it fluid, and not too much water so it's all runny. So it's really quite a learning to paint with watercolor is tricky. And if you can do that, then it makes painting with other paint media a little bit easier for you, because you can control watercolor. You can probably control almost any kind of paint. Alright, so this area is a little light. I'm going to go back and retouch it a little bit so it matches its other colors around it. And you just got to hold your breath when you're doing the really tight control work. I have found it's just like if you were shooting a firearm. Sometimes when you were aiming it, when I was in the military, we were taught to hold our breath just briefly before we squeezed off the round, and boy, did it make it easier to hit the target that way. And so here we're doing pretty much the same thing. We're simply holding our breath a bit so that we can steady our hand just for that split second that we need it to apply the paint. And then we can breathe again. Now, Wright State University, it's funny because its colors are green. Sometimes it makes you wonder if, a lot of kids, a lot of students complain sometimes because they had a plan for their town that had certain restaurants in it that have certain colors in them. They're like, but that was going to be my restaurant that was supposed to be red or green or whatever. And I just tell them that's too bad. I won't have to do it this way. Okay. So I'm going here. We're making good progress today for the first session. I haven't done this project in some time, so you all are getting a good representation of how it goes together. And see, I am not pushing down with any force whatsoever on the end of the brush. I'm just letting the capillary action of the paper. That means it soaks things up just like a towel soaks up water. I'm letting the capillary action of the paper pull the pigment or the colored portion of the paint right out of the brush. And the brush also has a tendency to hold a fluid in it, and then when you touch it to a surface, it discharges that fluid. Alright, I'm going to continue working here until I get my red building finished, and that will be all for today's session. Normally, at the end of a session, we would put our paintings over in a drying rack, and then in the next session I would have unloaded that drying rack, and your paintings will be located over on the countertop by the windows. And so it will have a poster board on top of it that tells you which period of the day it is, and furthermore, you will be able to find your painting down there because your name will be in the lower right hand corner down here, right? Excuse me, man, my voice is a mess, people. I'm going to have to rest it. Okay, I'm making fantastic progress here. Okay, and I'll be done with this portion in just a minute or so. But I don't want to rush through it and get bad results. So you just got to be patient when you're doing things like this so that you don't get bad results. But we will be cleaning up usually about 5 minutes before the end of class so that everybody can get all their debris put into the trash cans, and so that they can furthermore get their paintings in the rack and collect up their equipment materials, and then head out to your next location, wherever that may be. Okay, I think I'm going to be able to bring this portion of it to some level of closure here pretty quickly. And like I was saying, if we paint over top of the numbers, or lettering for that matter, it should show through unless you're trying to paint over it in black or violet or dark blue. It should be fine. So, and this is showing up just perfectly through the watercolor. And we can also go back later with thin brushes and just detail over this if we needed to, or we could even use very fine line markers in the end to detail it out as well, which we've done in the past as well. Alright, I think I'm about ready here to clean out my brush And set it aside and get busy doing something else here for the day. So I hope your painting is coming out nicely. I hope you haven't already had a disaster, even though that kind of stuff happens. So if you did, you're going to have to clean it up and brush yourself off and get the right mental attitude to continue on with the painting, even though you may have already had some bad luck. So that's part of painting. It's part of making art in general, part of life. It just doesn't always work out precisely how you had envisioned it when you started it. Okay, let me get that last little marking right there on the corner. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So, hope you're getting good results too. And if you are, fantastic. If you're not, try to figure out why. It's probably got something way you stir up your paint. And we will get back together again in the next session. So, have a nice day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.